Good update to choose, I guess. I mean, it's not the medic
Yeah.
update. All right, that's my segue. Welcome to Live with Search Engine Land. This is the content marketing edition. This is a really difficult time for a lot of brands and also just people communicating with one another. For example, I don't know how to end conversations anymore, as you're all about to find out at the end of this conversation in about an hour. So I've just been telling people, take care. I've been trying to stay safe, but at this point, we're about 6 weeks into the quarantine of since when it was declared a national emergency. And we've kind of moved past that stage of, well, this is what we're doing to protect our customers. This is what we're doing to protect our staff. And we're kind of figuring out what is it that we can convey at this point as brands? How do we convey that messaging? How do we respect quarantine and the sensitivity of the issue while still doing business, providing people the content that they want? And I don't even know if I've introduced myself yet, but I am George Nguyen, an editor for Search Engine Land, and I'm joined by 3 expert panelists. We're going to kick it off, but first I'm going to have some of them introduced. I'm going to have them all introduce themselves. Megan, you're up first.
Awesome. Thanks, George. Hi, everybody. My name is Meghan Keaney Anderson. I'm VP of Marketing for HubSpot, which is a marketing, sales, and software platform. And we have, like all of you, been trying to figure out how do we pivot during this time, been really sort of listening to what we're hearing from customers, the numbers we're getting out of our data, and trying to understand what things look like today, tomorrow, and 6 to 12 months in the future. So this is an awesome conversation. I'm psyched to be a part of it.
Thank you so much, Megan. I'm constantly looking like, am I on mute? I don't know if I am. I know a lot of people resonate with that. I'm like, I don't want people to hear something that they shouldn't be hearing inside my house. So I'm constantly looking down at my mic. Amanda, you're up next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Milligan. I'm the marketing director at Fractl, which is a growth marketing agency. We drive that growth primarily through content and digital PR. So we are very cognizant of trying to keep a tab on what's going on. And I'll be able to talk about some of that today, but how we've had to pivot some of the types of content strategies we've had for our clients, and also the way that we pitch that content. So yeah, looking forward to this conversation.
All righty, Lee.
Right, my name is Lee Odden. I'm the CEO of TopRank Marketing. We are a B2B content and influencer marketing agency, 19 years old. We're providing a lot of counsel to clients, mid-market companies, a lot of tech companies, even large companies like SAP, 3M, Oracle, Dell, and so forth, about how they can shift their messaging right now. What people want to know, what are the other companies doing in your portfolio? Because there's a lack of confidence and certainty right now in so many different ways, not just within marketing, but also within marketing operations, and also in terms of forecasting investments and that sort of thing. So it's been an interesting time getting a chance to work with and advise companies in what's really, almost a once in a lifetime kind of situation for us.
Absolutely, a once in a lifetime situation for everybody. And there are a lot of unique factors that I think are going to continue to play out. In a previous edition of Live with Search Engine Land, I think it was Lily Ray who mentioned that people are changing their search behavior in phases as their needs change, as the quarantine continues to move on, as businesses continue and adapt, or unfortunately have to close. So we're going to be talking about some of these challenges right now. But one of the biggest questions that I led with was what should brands be communicating? What should we be publishing at this point? That kind of tone. I know that a lot of you are advising clients. Are they trying to go in a certain direction with it, and you're telling them, hey, maybe take it safer, or maybe be a little bit bolder? Is there a discrepancy between what your clients want to do versus what you're advising that they do, or is there a general trend there? Lee, I want to start with you and then make our way back around to Megan.
Sure. So being fortunate to work with some of these enterprise companies, they have very sophisticated messaging protocols and staff that help guide narratives that are included in their marketing. So they do different from one company to another, but generally the trend has been to be supportive and empathetic to the customer, to really dig into, okay, how does this current environment change, how is it changing the life for our customer? And where can we be of assistance? Not just in terms of what software or hardware or solutions can we offer to help them solve a problem, but what else is present as an opportunity in our ecosystem in terms of the relationships and the communities that we're a part of. Can we add resources to? What can we do from an information standpoint to help support people do what they need to do? What organizations can we contribute to? What initiatives can we sponsor or be a part of? And there's even some fun stuff that people are doing. Like SAP just did, it was yesterday, SAP for Kids. It was Bring Your Kids to Virtual Work Day. And they did this really cool live streaming thing with celebrities and artists and influencers or whatever. And it was a really great way for people to, turn this live YouTube video on and have their kids sitting there next to them at home and actually, take a yoga class or learn how to draw something or make a song or whatever. So it's been a bit of a mix, but I think the trend is all around empathy for the customer.
Absolutely. And if your kids are tuning in now, do you have, I know, Megan, you have a child. That's got to be a little bit stressful there. But that's my segue. And so the question goes to you next.
Yeah, my toddler has not quite learned the search algorithm to Google. She's working on it. She's 3. She's still sitting with Curious George and Sesame Street. An uptick of Curious George and Sesame Street in recent days as I've been working and watching her. But yeah, I think in answer to your question, there's 2 ways that I would think about this. One is, how do you communicate in direct response to the crisis? And that's a lot of what Lee was saying of, when we saw the crisis hit a height in urgency, there are a few things we did right off the bat. We stopped social promotion until we could figure out the right tone to come back in. We had a product that was launching, a brand new CMS that the team had worked really hard on, but we actually halted that launch. We did a much quieter launch. Although the product is still available. We kind of did a full crisis communications stop just to take a beat and assess what the tone is. And then, of course, we came back with a tone of empathy, changed our sales emails and our marketing emails to reflect the times. So there's a lot of just immediate response stuff that you have to do. But then the second piece of this is, after the sort of peak of the crisis, there is a new world that you are marketing and selling in. And so how do you reflect those times? And that is where we've seen a lot of educational content really rise to the surface. And, I think the most amazing thing is, so we've been aggregating data from our 70,000 customers around the world in terms of how are their sales, how's their marketing, so that we could try to see some trends. And unsurprisingly, deal volume is down, but perhaps surprisingly, activity with customers is up. Website traffic is up. Engagement with marketing emails is up. And so people have gone into their homes, but they haven't disappeared. And actually, they're searching. They're seeking information. They are, everything from the sorts that get really focused on the crisis itself to the ones who are trying to reinvent themselves in this time. And so we've sort of shifted our content strategy to try to address those needs. And the tone there has all been educational. So I'd say our promotional stuff has dropped down to, close to 0. Our educational, useful stuff has gone way up. And as a result, I'm just going to pull up some numbers. So we have HubSpot's got what we call HubSpot Academy, which is a collection of free courses you can take. And traffic to that Academy site has more than doubled since March 8th. And our marketing blog, which tend to have useful search-driven content, has seen a 40% rise in weekly organic. So I think that's an important demarcation here that, there's there's activity out there. And much like any other time, if you can understand what people are searching for and what matters to them at this point and match it and be useful, that's sort of how we move forward through this, I think.
Excellent. I do want to know how exactly you're identifying those opportunities. I mean, I feel like a lot of people are just guided by a human sense of, well, this is a really troubling time. What's the best thing I could possibly do right now? Even within our own organization. Normally we have our MarTech West conference in April in San Jose. And of course that had to be canceled. And so we did Discover MarTech, which was online, and we had a huge turnout for it. But of course that's just like a free event. So finding a way to find out what people want and provide it to them is going to continue to be a big deal. And I'm wondering how you can do that. But I want to let Amanda get a chance to address the question first.
Yeah, sure. I agree with everything that's been said. We have a few different lenses we've had to look at this with, because we have a lot of clients who are, first and foremost, are concerned about, okay, what about what we have in progress? You know, I think a lot of people are in this situation where it's not just about planning. It's we have things that are being produced now and what happens. And nobody seems to be like really adamant about going one way or another. They're looking for guidance. And I agree that it's a matter of deciding whether to pivot is a matter of empathy. So, and to what Meghan said, it's a matter of value. Don't say anything if you're not going to be providing some kind of value. I think there's a lot of sentiment kind of going around, and people are getting kind of skeptical or, you know, cynical about brands just saying things that sound nice, but they're not actually doing anything. And I think that's where the kind of maybe this question comes from, that people are afraid of sounding inauthentic. But if you do have something where you know that you can help your target audience, or you're just helping them the way you already were and you're planning to set that up for later, you know, that's how you continue to build trust. And I think this is a good time for that audience building. I was talking to Joe Polizzi a couple months ago, and he's all about that, like building audiences. And this is, I think, you know, that applies now. You might not, you know, Meghan, it's really interesting what you were saying about the numbers where, you know, conversions aren't as high. That makes total sense. People just don't have the money right now. But if people are still looking for that information, they're looking for reassurance, it makes sense when you think about it. So for on-site, the way that we think about it at Fractl is we have rank-worthy content. So that's the stuff that's like on-sites where we strategically figure out what we want people to, you know, what they want to be experts in. We help them get that communication out there. So that hasn't changed a ton unless there's something COVID related that they need to say, or they need to pivot something they were talking about because it's just not the same world anymore and they need to fix it. But for the other bucket, which is our link-worthy content, so that's stuff that we're creating, it's original research and we're pitching it to writers. That's been interesting too, because now it's not just what the brand wants, it's what what the audiences want, it's what the writers think is the right thing to be talking about through their publications. And what we've seen with that is, and I think people can just see this organically, that a lot of publications are talking about it. No matter what vertical they're in, at some point they're talking about it, because it does impact everybody in some way. So what we've been advising clients and what we've been doing for them is taking anything that has some kind of a tie, not just to COVID-19, but to the way that the world has changed. It makes sense in a lot of cases to change the angle. It's a lot of the same information, but you're just pitching it a little differently. You're not saying like, you know, for example, we had a campaign in progress that was about working from, it just happened to be about like co-working and trust, right? That's the kind of an easy example to explain, because suddenly everyone's working from home. We didn't even have that in mind when we created it. But as we pitched it, we said, okay, now it's under a new lens. This information's from a couple months ago, but now it's interesting to see, what did people think before they had to do this? You know, what they anticipated working from home. So there has been a lot of nuance with that. That doesn't mean that there isn't still content that people want to see on these publications that is not COVID related. That certainly is the case. But I think a lot of the time it is a matter of changing it a little bit to not sound tone deaf as to what's going on around us.
Yes, absolutely. And even just like with the coverage that I put out regularly on Search Engine Land, I found that when I got into this industry, I started in content marketing. And then I became a journalist for Search Engine Land. And I didn't consider how the greater happenings of the world would really impact my day-to-day. And there's not a single day where I don't look at something or write something about the virus, about the pandemic. But it's just, when I started, I realized that search really touches everything about the way the world works, And so that's kind of really manifested right now, especially in the way search results have changed. If you just type in coronavirus and Google's entire search results page is unrecognizable from what it was like a month ago. But I don't want to get too off topic here. So you said you stopped social, but then you kind of restarted it and halted product launches. But then they kind of came back in like under the radar. Are you all finding that that's kind of the case with your clients when you're that still want to be launching these products?
I think that tracking engagement has become more important than ever before. And so we're being as intentional as we can be. I think our social team did a really nice job of immediately deciding, to press pause and then start to roll out content that they felt like was close to the crisis, and then content that was more helpful about being at home and remote working and staying in that helpful space. But every time they put something out, they are watching the engagement rates on it. They're trying to see if it is if it's getting through, if people are responding negatively to it. And so one thing that they changed, which I really admire, is typically they schedule out posts in advance. They switch to an entirely manual posting for their social content, because they wanted the opportunity to be able to say, okay, that went well, or that didn't go well, and to adapt on the fly and to adapt to news that's happening. On the product launch side, we took the stance of, you never want to hold back a product that could help somebody, especially a growing business at this point. And so we didn't want to, just because we couldn't do the big promotional buzzy campaign, we didn't want to hold back the product. So what we did was we split the product launch into essential assets. So pricing page, product page, educational stuff related to the product, and promotional stuff. So ads, our big social media campaign around it, thought leadership content, that kind of thing, and phase that out over time. And so now we're about, a month past that. We might just start to phase some of that in, but we'll watch the engagement rates to determine the right timing on that.
Lee, it looked like you were about to answer as well.
Well, it's interesting. There are some companies that we're fortunate to work with that are actually Idealist, or they are perfect for this time. So an example would be Monday.com, project management software. I mean, they're giving away free software to small businesses. It's a digital product. It's something that is increased in demand right now, but they're actually, and I think it's really smart advice to pause social to kind of take inventory of the situation, so we can, marshal our approach or our resources and our messaging accordingly. And what they've ended up doing is really putting more into social and launching what we call a social first campaign on LinkedIn, where, and I liked what Amanda said about, I think she was saying about trust and authentic content, or both of Megan and Amanda were saying something about that. So what we're doing is we're working with industry influencers and people who represent the customer. So not famous influencers. These are people who do what the customer does. They just happen to have a little more of a following, and having them tell personal stories relative to the current environment in the context of the software. So it's very interesting. It's very heartfelt. It's very personal. And getting that out on social has achieved record numbers in terms of engagement through social communities. So that's been an interesting, I guess, reaction, and that's appropriate for that company. The same thing might not be true for some, large server or hardware company or whatever, So it's got to be, obviously, as we said before, empathetic to the customer situation.
Lee, I think that's really smart. So if I can jump in just for a second there, I think what you hit on is really important, is that you kind of have to, as a business, understand, what is my role in this whole thing? Am I very closely tied to the economic downturn in that I power businesses? Am I very closely tied to the healthcare industry? Or am I far away from that? And the interesting thing about this is your content strategy can shift based on that. So one of the more interesting things that I read is, if you take NPR, right? They are seeing uneven, like their changes in podcast listenership have been really uneven. There are two areas where podcast listenership has gone through the roof. One is very obviously Corona-related, crisis-related content, their news shows, all that. But the other is like Tiny Desk, their music show. And I think Tiny Desk saw like 120% increase week over week in listenership. And some of their like lighter programming has seen huge lifts. And that's because people need a break. They need levity. They need space from this. And so you may be sitting listening to this conversation thinking like, okay, this is great, but my business has nothing to do with healthcare. My business has nothing to do with helping small businesses through this economic downturn. I make widgets. And I can't sell them right now. There should be a moment of evaluation that you do of a business to say, what role can I have in this? What need can I address? And your content strategy can match that. So I think that's a really nuanced point, Lee, that you laid out, and wanted to follow up there.
Yeah, that's a good point. Everyone's trying to strike this balance between your own efforts and what everyone else wants, and hopefully that all falls in line. And that example that you provided, Lee, was just such a perfect fit for a time like this. And when you can identify that opportunity, going back to basics and simply showcasing people that are benefiting from your product, that's a very beautiful thing. And it's also very cost effective, I would assume. But I think a lot of brands are struggling to identify content opportunities. I personally am of the persuasion that it's not right for every sector to try to make a content pivot for the coronavirus pandemic, because just some sectors, the best you can do is tell people, hey, we're on pause right now. But have any of you found an approach to helping your clients with content marketing campaigns? Have you laid out the groundwork or a framework for something that you found has worked to help identify opportunities? Fairly nebulous question, but I'm wondering how you go about it.
Well, there's obviously, as thoughtful and authentic as we need to be about how we approach content in this situation, in this environment, the demand for knowledge and information about solutions that companies are offering hasn't gone away. It's certainly changed. And, Meghan mentioned this spike in search traffic that she's experiencing, and I know we've seen this a lot too. So the opportunity identified is using search data to understand that there is an increased demand via search for certain types of products and solutions. So making sure to shore up the SEO efforts in those areas. We should be doing this anyway, right? Always on optimization. Of course, we know that's not always the case. Because of resources or whatever, but now is a great opportunity for especially that kind of opportunism, because it can generate return immediately. You know what I mean? Depending on what your starting point is, right? If you have an authoritative site and you add content, obviously it's going to get crawled right away. So if you can identify that demand, like a good SEO practice would, I think that's something that we've seen work. And because of being in tech, and because of offering the kinds of because of clients that offer the kinds of digital solutions that are timely right now, they're seeing a positive impact. Again, if you make widgets, like Meghan said, maybe not, but maybe it's looking for information, right?
Widget sellers, they're always the butt, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, the basics, super important. And going back to that now is a very big reminder. I'm sorry, Amanda, were you going to say something?
Yeah, just separate from, I already spoke kind of about pivoting what's going on. I agree that some people it's not right for a brand to talk about COVID-19 necessarily if they have nothing to do with it. But what I encourage people to do, our clients, anybody really, is if you're thinking about something new to create, this is an opportunity in your brainstorming for ideas to not just, I think it's easy to get stuck on the pandemic. Obviously, it's a huge issue. But how it's impacting day-to-day lives ties a lot to different businesses. So even in the widget perspective, it could be something related to how people, I was using, I was writing a post for Moz using the new the exploding topics backlinko tool. And one of the things I was finding was the different software that is about efficiency or like do it yourself has gotten much trendier now. Probably the sad reality is that people are downsizing and they have to try to make it work. So you have these like completely other very human emotions going on. even separate from health and my family, if it's their work or their, their livelihoods. And there's a lot of aspects to that that we have to explore for our audience. So in that case, it's, I have to continue doing my job at my company, or I have a company and I have to keep, everybody, the work going, our clients and customers happy. Like, how do I do that now? You have to ask yourself if you fit into that equation. If you haven't, can you? And what can you, and this kind of harkens back a bit to what Meghan was saying earlier too. So that's what I'm encouraging people to do, is to take that time to assess, like, what are the emotions being associated with here, in just like the smaller struggles happening. Any kind of pain point you can alleviate at this point is much appreciated. And that could be a design tool that's free and you can give to your whole team right now. Because it seems like, okay, that's helpful, but really for some people it's extremely helpful, because they maybe had to lay off their designer, which is just like a terrible situation, but they still have to get the work done, so, or if it's somebody who's laid off, maybe they need a tool for education or to find jobs. There's just it's like an endless number of things that people can need help with. So I have encouraged people right now, when they're thinking about what do I need to do right now, not pivot what I already have, but what can I create? I encourage that line of thinking to try to get them there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Lee, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, one of the great opportunities is to just simply create value in the context of your brand. And for example, a lot of people are looking at upskilling, cross-training, and your business may have educational, useful information that could help someone. Maybe they're not going to be your customer in a month or in a couple of weeks, but maybe they will be 6 months down the line, because you've created affinity around your brand by providing useful information that helped them shift in a career, or they referred you to somebody else. So a lot of people are looking to fill in the time that they're not spending commuting. There might be infotaining content that your brand could put out. It's still contextually relevant to your business, but at the same time, it's entertaining in some way. So there's if you have the capability to create, positive experiences for an audience that you can have a good impact on, that could be an opportunity right now too. It doesn't tie directly to the ROI type of outcomes that we wish we could all go after every day, but it does create the kind of value, because at the end of this, when we see light at the end of this tunnel, people are going to feel what they're going to feel about brands, as Amanda was saying, and what are the emotions, right? So are you going to be one of those brands that your audience feels really positively about, right? And content will help you get there.
Yeah.
Hopefully this session is serving people in a similar manner that you've described, Lee. That is my cautious optimism there as we move into the weekend. That's what's going to drive me through. But I did want to talk also about being optimistic. We're identifying opportunities by exploring the way people are living their lives now and the things that they're feeling, and all the little minor inconveniences that might not have bothered us before are now suddenly so colossal, and there are opportunities to help address them. How do our brands create that content marketing to help satisfy the user, to kind of answer their questions, make them feel like they're not alone, show that our brand is here to support them, but without going overboard on the optimism and kind of ignoring the sensitivity of the issue? I know it also sounds like it's like you're at counseling, right? About how to convey your emotions as a brand, but that's what we need to do. So how do we walk that fine line? I'm just going to throw that out there, and I don't want anyone to have to jump into the answer if they're not ready. But Amanda, you look ready. Are you ready?
No, it's such an interesting question, because it applies like across the board, right? Like, when talking to anybody, I think everybody wants to be optimistic to, we need to get by day to day. I think one of the key things is acknowledging what's like this. I think, George, when you said you don't know how to begin or end conversations sometimes, I think this speaks to that, where you have to acknowledge that something's going on. You don't want to be oblivious. And that's where brands can accidentally tread into. If they're like, everything's great, nothing's happening, nobody lost their jobs, these industries are going to be the same, like it's all going to go back to normal. And when we know that a lot of these industries are not going to go fully back to normal, they're going to look different at the end of this. So I don't think it's a matter of like you have to harp on that or do entire things about like doom and gloom and this is how it's all going to go down. But you can't be in denial of it either, because then if somebody's listening to that and they've had a very different experience, they're not going to trust you anymore. And they're going to think you're, talking BS and not really saying anything meaningful. You have to at least acknowledge the truth of what's happening before you dive into the optimism. Because otherwise it's not an authentic thing in the first place. Like, why they won't believe your optimism if you are in denial about what's happening in the first place. And I feel like that applies to everybody. It applies to personal and brand communications.
Amanda Milligan, I love that. Just dropping us some advice across the board, no matter where you are in life, what your job is. There you go. Megan, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No, that's perfectly fine. We've been talking a lot internally at HubSpot about the kind of joint concept right now of empathy and empowerment, and how you kind of right now can't have one without the other. So you can't go out there with the optimistic empowerment, everything's going to be okay, we're going to be the new economy, without first having the empathetic moment of, this is hard, like we are in this. But I also think on the flip side, you can't get stuck in empathy alone and never look to the future. And so I think there is this kind of careful balance that companies need to walk. I think that the good news here is that we are human, right? And so the best way to judge whether something is going to land right or feel right is to talk to people within your own company and talk with your customers. And, this is a strange one because it has affected so many people worldwide. And you're almost always 1 or 2 degrees of separation from somebody who has really seriously been hit by this, either from a health standpoint or a family member that's lost a job. And so I think that that we should use the power of our humanity within our own organizations even to talk about approaches we're taking and content we're putting out there and tones that we're using, and just feel like use that as a first filter internally before going externally. But I do think that like you kind of need both. And the other thing is, like, you're going to make a mistake in this. We're all going to make a mistake in this. And I think part of having that humanity is to, if you do say something accidentally that is out of tone or gets a bad reaction, to just listen and own that and apologize for it and move forward and not let it keep you out of the arena.
Absolutely. Yeah. Very interesting to think about. As we create this content and assuming that we're doing things well, that we're maintaining that respect and helping our users, a lot of the priorities that we had before, maybe we can continue to push them forward and that would be ideal. But the way that we're measuring our success probably has to change a lot. I'm wondering what changes you've seen in that area. Are there different KPIs you're using? Have you, seen, like you said, some people are really just doing social manually instead of automating it. So what kind of engagement factors are you looking at? How are you measuring success for your content marketing or your other campaigns at the moment?
I know for us, we use an attract, engage, convert model. Broad-based concepts. It's universally true. It's still true right now. Still trying to attract the right audience, create a great experience for them, and then help them make the next decision, help them take the next step, whatever that may be. So those KPIs are still relevant. But I know for us, and we walk the talk as far as working with influencers. So in the realm of authentic content and creating trust and credibility, there's an important role to play. And while it is important to be empathetic with customers, they also are also looking for leadership. They want to be understood, but they also want to feel more confident about what the go forward, what comes next is. And so I think that's an important messaging component that should be part of what we're doing right now. And there are metrics to go along with that. Things like taking benchmarks for share of voice, for affinity, for a sentiment, and that sort of thing. Now, if you are working with internal and external voices or influencers, and I mean that in a very broad sense, these are individuals whose social activity you can track as a cohort, as a group, and you can take a benchmark and go, look, here's where we are today amongst this sample of our customers. It could be a sample of, traditional influencers or even employees. And we're taking benchmarks of those in terms of what they're talking about on the social web, and then taking those measurements as we go. And what we're looking for is to increase positive sentiment. We're trying to increase affinity between, what our solutions can do in a positive way, right? And the brand. And so what we're trying to go after there is to increase the positive discussions, driving conversations that result in advocacy, even in a situation like this, where explicit marketing is a no-no, right? But what is a yes is people talking authentically and organically about the work that they've got to get done, even though it's a little more challenging right now. And I think the metrics that go along with that are really, really important. And they have, they're not as specific as, conversion rate per se for, an asset download or a lead or whatever. Those things are still true, but they are about monitoring conversations around specific groups of people who may represent who you're after or a sample of who you're after.
I love that. And, I feel like if I was talking to marketers even 6 months ago, the lack of a tangible number to grasp hold of kind of scares some people, but you got to adjust with the times, right? I mean, there are plenty of numbers out there now and they're super scary and nobody seems to want to grasp a hold of those. But okay, I wanted to open the floor to Amanda, Megan, if you wanted to answer that question as well.
The only thing I would add is just, because I think Lee and Megan have both spoken to like the engagement side and tracking even just traffic and how people are engaging with their content. I think it's important to remember that even if you recognize that you have to set that expectation internally or with your clients. So it's you determining, okay, what is now the purpose of this and what are the KPIs I'm going to assign to it? And then telling that story internally or to your clients so that everybody's on the same page now. Like, okay, we created this in the first place for a different reason. We are adapting it to do this now. And this is how we're going to track it. And maybe in 6 months, we'll reassess how we can change that. But just to make sure that everybody now understands what you're trying to achieve. But that's a part that people can overlook sometimes.
Yeah, agree with all that. I will add one more thing, which is that we're putting more emphasis on like qualitative data than quantitative right now. I mean, we're still collecting all the quantitative data we have and we're keeping tabs on engagement rate to close rate, all of those things. But, when this crisis first hit, our CEO, Brian Halligan, he put out an email address for people to write him about what they're seeing and what they're experiencing. And every email that went into that inbox got forwarded around our company a dozen times so that we could put those numbers into context a little bit. I know he also reaches out to like the small business sales team at HubSpot to try to understand what are you hearing on calls and how has the tenor changed. And I think we're okay. We're more okay than we typically are with trying to understand anecdotal evidence and gut reactions because these numbers are different than we've seen before. And I think some of that qualitative stuff that we usually kind of push off to the side is just like nice to have has become more and more important.
Yeah, I guess right, KPI is definitely going to be an evolving thing as we continue to move forward. So as I mentioned earlier, we have gotten the message out about how our brands are initially adapting. Maybe a few weeks later, or even just in that same message, telling customers that we're here for them. A lot of stuff like that has been going around, and my inbox is full of like airline messages. But a lot of those messages, they just seem like they're stagnating. It seems like kind of the same thing again and again. And I know that's not a pattern that a lot of brands want to fall into. Have you given any thought to, just in a general sense, what is the next thing? I mean, we're 6 weeks in. What about 8 weeks in, 3 months in? Do you have some general idea of what content marketing, what we're going to be conveying is? Are you optimistic that we're going to be conveying more of like the normal stuff and easing back into it? Or is everything really just kind of, hey, we got to see how this unfolds. Every week, we got to see how this unfolds, what's on the news, and then we got to respect that. And then we'll make a plan based on that. What has that been like, that process?
I think you have to, if I can jump in, I think you simultaneously have to run, you have to be strategic and tactical at the same time, or strategic and opportunistic. So of course you have to continuously evaluate nuance and opportunities as you go. But at the same time, at some point the company's going to have to take a stand. And what is it that they stand for in this environment? And what do they stand for in terms of the go forward? Who do they want to be for the customer when things do start to change? I don't think things will ever go back to normal, right? I think that's gone. Digital transformation for companies has been accelerated at an incredible rate because of this, and will continue to do so. And that is going to change the environment in which business operates across the board. And so that's the new reality, and I think companies, as they take that into account, will have to, like I said, take a stand for what is it they want to be, or who do they want to be for their customer on the go forward. And that messaging or that narrative, that position is what should strategically drive their content marketing, whatever that might be, whatever's relevant to their business, their industry, their customers.
Yeah. And that reality is unwritten, right? Like that's a future that we have the chance as, as businesses, as people in society to, stare at that empty page and start to write it together. And I think that a lot of how you can think about like starting to expand your content types and strategies should follow that of, where do we think the world is headed? And taking a look at all so the crisis hit, but what are all the epiphenomenal things that are rippling out as a result of that? And grabbing on to one of those ripples and being able to understand or help the world understand how the world will change because of that. I think that's, I'm not talking about getting into the game of like predictions or, trying to say what it's going to look like a year from now, but getting curious around one of those threads that's changing and trying to play a role in helping your audience explore that and understand that. I think there's an immense amount of content attached to that.
Yeah, I love what both of you have said. It feels more like a partnership rather than you're just putting the content out there. You're saying, I don't know all the answers necessarily, who does?
Right. Yeah.
But we're gonna work with you to figure those out. I think George, you kind of made it sound like you were touching on the whole people are just getting inundated with the same messages over and over again. And I encourage marketers to think back to that writing rule from a million years ago, show, don't tell, because I know that I've gotten sick of seeing messages from every brand I've ever had contact with, like, we're here for you. And I think that's going to get more important as the weeks go on, where they're going to get tired of like, we get it, like everyone's, here, but what does that actually mean? And how are you actually going to help us? So stop talking about it and start doing whatever you've decided based on, what we talked about in this conversation is going to be helpful. And that's going to change every week. And you're not going to know in 3 weeks what's going to be the most helpful, but assess that regularly.
That's a really good point. You talked about authentic and credible content. The way to accelerate that is give evidence, like you say, and stop saying in these uncertain times.
Have you seen, there's a YouTube video, I don't even know who compiled this, but it's literally called like every COVID ad is the same.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's resonating with so many people because it's like the same soft intro piano and like in these, like you said, in these uncertain times. And it's just, it very well illustrates that people are getting the same thing over and over again, and it doesn't mean anything anymore. So yeah, show, don't tell.
This is the only opportunity for a segue I'm gonna have at this for something I really wanted to shoehorn in here, which was the meme thing. Just to bring some levity to what we're talking about, and memes, they can be content marketing, right? The one I'm gonna share, if you have one, then please feel free to share it if it's appropriate. But just for me, it's not from a brand or anything. I was a teacher for 5 or 6 years for elementary schools mainly, and my favorite meme throughout all of this has been a lot of parents are about to find out that the teacher really wasn't the problem. And if you have kids and you're watching this and you are very shook and offended, I do apologize, but most teachers are really doing their best. Anybody else want to share a meme really quickly?
I'd like to share one. There's a friend of mine, Tim Washer, who put together, he's a comedian, but he does corporate marketing, a lot of video, and he has this social distancing from carbs, the dreaded COVID-15, 15 pounds we've all gained. And so if you go to timwasher.com, it's right there front and center. It is absolutely hilarious. And it should be more of a meme than it is, but it's pretty, pokes a lot of fun at our eating habits as we are hunkered down in our homes over these last 6 weeks or so. I can't get away from Tiger King memes, of course, superheroes bowing to doctors, and of course, Bill Clinton listening to music and swapping out the album covers, as we try to fill our time when we're not commuting.
I've loved, so Getty Museum, one of my colleagues, Mark, was showing me this a while ago, encouraged people to like recreate works of art using things in their house. So, famous settings using like Coke bottles and laundry and, waffles from the morning. And they sort of sparked this whole thing from my standpoint, but then I just love the creativity that people have had around taking objects in their house because they can't do anything else and creating these like hilarious or vastly creative settings.
I really hope I get the opportunity to do like a brief write-up on the memes you all shared. But Lee, I feel a little bit attacked because I immediately got on this call and I was talking about the flour that I just acquired and I was holding up a box of Teddy Grahams. Okay, we have a little bit of time left. And one of the reasons that one of the things that really appealed to me about content marketing when I first made my career transition over into it, a few years ago, was that it wasn't limited to a particular format. When most of us think about content marketing, we think about, the bread and butter, the how-tos, the tutorials, those blog posts, right? They double for SEO and all that stuff, but there's a whole range of content marketing. Meghan, I know you do the growth show for HubSpot, right? That's a podcast. And a lot of brands are really into doing experimental things, or at least they were. Are you finding that brands are more reluctant to be experimental, or are they actually using the opportunities that they're identifying now to dive more into that, say, hey, we'll figure out what the KPIs are later, but this is the right thing to do and we can do it. And it is a marketing initiative, yes, but it also fulfills a greater need. Where have your clients been in that regard?
I can start there just with my experience in my own company. I think, one thing this crisis has done is it's shut off sections of your work and your team. So if you've got an events team and all events have moved online, there's bandwidth there and there's creativity and talent there. And so I think it actually does the latter. I think it creates the opportunity for you to experiment a little bit more because you're out of the norm. You're out of sort of the run of, like, typically you're just hitting monthly numbers. You've got your patterns. It takes a lot to break out of that mold. And you have a single event that has forced everybody out of their kind of comfort zone. The only thing left is to experiment. And at the same time, you've got changes in consumer behavior and content consumption. You talked about podcasts. We've been debating a lot internally around like, wow, no one has a commute anymore. So are people listening to podcasts or not? And, we found varying things there, but I think it is a good time to try to examine where the opportunities are, even the ones that aren't that measurable yet, and try to just get in the water and splash around and see if you can create something that breaks through.
In this regard, in terms of experimenting or doing things a little bit differently, it's maybe why we've had such a good experience for our agency and with our clients during this time. And so what I mean by that is, of course we create ebooks and blog posts and videos and infographics and all that sort of thing, social messages. But for the last 5 years or so, we've really been focusing on interactive content. even done virtual reality experiences. And this is all for B2B. And so that those sorts of things stand out. But one area, as you mentioned, Meghan, is the podcasts. This is something, so we're not recommending podcasts just because it's different, but taking into account this current situation, like you say, people don't have a commute. Is there a captive audience situation in a particular industry? If there is, we determine that is to be the case, then we have this turnkey solution, and a lot of evidence of having done podcasts for lots of other companies, and can take something and create the content in a format that is a lot more empathetic to how the customer wants to consume it, right? Discover, consume, and act on it. So this has been really good in terms of also collecting data around what's actually resonating, because we used to manage maybe 5 or 6 different podcasts or different brands. Now it's double that, and that's a lot more data we can use, and the collective wisdom out of that data is just going to rise the tide, or rise the ships. So the rising tide lifts all ships. Yeah, you know what I mean.
Yeah, we oh, sorry, go ahead, Megan.
I was just going to say, I think that you'll see, I just said we should not get into the business of predicting the future, and here I go. But I would imagine, and could be wrong, that we will see some more innovation in online events, and in things like this, conversations that happen like this. I know that there's a whole ecosystem that's sort of building around Zoom right now, with apps that you can add onto it, and backgrounds, and augmented reality. And so I think we could see some interesting innovation there, both in terms of the technology, but then also just in terms of the creativity and approaches that people take. And I think that, people will, I think YouTube is probably going to see some rises in terms of the amount of people consuming streaming video content. So I think you can look to some of the embers of what's around and try to figure out how people are spending their time and try to meet them there. Go ahead, Amanda.
Yeah, that's a great point. You just mentioned YouTube. What in the B2B side, especially, we're seeing a big uptick in LinkedIn Live interest from B2B companies in producing content and publishing via LinkedIn Live. Just in the last 2 or 3 weeks, has been very, very interesting to see.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, for our clients, a lot of it was a matter of timeliness. So anything that was a little different was that we would come up with ideas. We had a mass brainstorm of okay, let's look at our clients who have something to do with this and how can they be helpful. Mm-hmm. And basically saying to them, we're going to do this on an expedited timeline and we think it's going to work, but it's a test. A lot of the time, especially when you're trying to do stuff that needs to be happen now, again, it's about setting expectations. It's we're going to do this. We think it's going to work. If it doesn't, we'll try something else. So that spirit of partnership that was spoken about earlier. The other thing I was going to say was just, if you've seen Steakum's Twitter account.
I was literally about to mention Steakum. I was this is the time when businesses find their personality and find their voice, because
unreal. Just unreal.
You should tell them what it is.
Oh yeah, if you haven't seen it, I don't even know how to explain it. It's just
I haven't seen it, so I'm looking it up right now, but go ahead.
They've been just tweeting philosophical explanations of how to handle the crisis and understand the messaging that's being delivered by politicians. It just completely has nothing to do with with their brand, which it was so interesting to me, because I'm normally this would never fly.
The follower account has exploded, and Washington Post did a story on them and what's going on behind it, and so
everybody loves it.
Yeah, and I think it's a risk, right? You step outside of your norm, you take a risk, and sometimes it pays off. Years ago, even outside of a crisis, MoonPie did the same thing on social, where they got an actual voice and personality and playfulness, and it really paid off. So I don't think every company can do this. I think you really have to have the substance and the authenticity behind it, but now is the time, right?
In that case, I think it speaks to, because I was just in awe that they pulled that off. And it was mostly, I think they recognized, a lot of people have, that people are desperate for just sane, logical content, just to hear some voice of reason, no matter where it's coming from. and they were the first ones to do it. And it was just so interesting that it was coming from them that it took off. But seizing that out, like that opportunity of what are people just they really want. So like you were, both of you I think were speaking earlier about like just like happy content, things that make you feel good. I think there was this vacuum of how are we supposed to be parsing all this information that's being given to us all the time?
Yeah.
And they leapt on that opportunity and it really paid off because it's been taken very well. So it's things you might not think would work in the past can. You just need to be smart about it and know it's a test and it might not work out.
Steakums. Okay. I just went through like their pin tweet and the one right after it, and it's like the total opposite.
Yeah.
I'll read it for people who are going to be watching this video later. The pin tweet says, "Friendly reminder: in good time or in times of uncertainty and misinformation, anecdotes are not data. Good data is carefully measured and collected information based on a range of subject-dependent factors, including but not limited to controlled variables, meta-analysis, and randomization." Then the next tweet right below that. "Gonna keep preaching from the frozen meat pulpit until this account runs into the ground because that's marketing, baby." Okay.
Wild.
Oh, very, very fascinating. All right. Well, this is obviously a win for Steakums, and we have just about 1 minute for each of you. If you want to share a win from one of your clients, I know that a lot of information is confidential, but if you want to speak in general terms about something that they've done with their content that they found is successful during this time, I'd love to hear it if you're able to do so. Let's start off with Lee. Do you have one for us? Or if you want to pass for the time, then we can make our way around.
Here's an idea. I'm going to share an idea. Like, yeah, sure. There's a lot of fun stuff happening, to be honest. But this is really recent. So something we've been doing internally, and I have one of my associates, Ashley Zeckman, is behind all of this, and it is creating social engagement opportunities amongst our team through themed Zoom calls. And then we publish that we're doing this externally. People are like, I want to get in there. I want to get in on that. So I dressed as a penguin on Wednesday because it was Halloween in April meeting day or whatever. We had 80s or maybe it was 90s day. And so people that came for the all hands meeting had to dress in a 90s theme. Just this morning, we had a, like, you know, that game Clue or whatever. We had this murder mystery we had to solve via Zoom, and there was a narrative and characters, and we all had to act, and it was hilarious. And then, you know, so doing that, creating experience, a shared experience amongst each other is actually awesome, especially in the digital environment for team building and all that. And that's all good. But getting the story of doing that through our agency social channels has resonated really, really well with our community, with our customers. And so I think maybe it falls in the category. It's a win to me in terms of creating positive experience internally and externally, and creating anticipation amongst our community and sort of a connection. It's like, oh, we should try that idea. We should do that. That'd be fun. Maybe it's a distraction. Maybe it's just goodwill. But
from a consumer standpoint,
I consider it a win for us.
Like, I think that it's just so important to know that the brand or the agency or whoever, whatever company entity that you're supporting, the people that work there love working there. That's always meant a lot to me as a consumer. And so showing that definitely is going to be great marketing for any brand. Amanda, do you have a story?
Yeah, so I used to work on the services side for many years, and now I market the agency. So I've been kind of outside looking in at what's happening right now with the work. And I've just been very impressed that they've managed to turn around, to change, to adapt to the content they need to create. I think I mentioned earlier, there was a piece that we were trying to pitch about working from home, and that got published on CNET. And then, you know, when we came up with these ideas about like, how can these brands that are relevant speak to this? And we had another client, we did a survey for them on how different generations are reacting to this, which has been an interesting, frustrating for some people topic that's been going around. And to put some numbers behind that resonated a lot. So to turn that around quickly, and that was in Rolling Stone. So it's just been a very, like, our team being so agile, I think, is something I've always admired about marketing. You have to be constantly adapting and testing and measuring. And now I feel like it's just the timeline is even shorter. It's like every day I check in with my team. I'm like, what are we thinking based on what we've seen yesterday? How does this change today? So it's encouraging in that way, just to see the creativity that's coming out of all of this, and the way that we are still able to get wins. Sometimes it can feel really discouraging, just because business is slower for a lot of industries, but to be able to get some wins has felt good.
Yeah, and everything changing so quickly. I feel like on everyone's resume, saying that you worked during this time should count like double. It should be weighted, for all the adjustments. Megan, do you have a story?
Yeah, I mean, we've got the interesting thing is we've got a diverse range of customers. So we've got customers like Zoll.com who are in the healthcare device space, and they pivoted to create, I think they committed to creating 10,000 ventilators a day for the crisis. And then they're completely other end of the spectrum. There's a coffee company that we work with called Coffee on Q in Australia that shifted their business from a in-person coffee shop to online delivery and coffee grocery. So I think it's just been, content strategy comes from somewhere, and it's got to be baked in substance. And I think the thing that I've seen across our customer base is that it's been a pivot that the company has made first that has paved the way for new content, new ideas, new connections with people that they didn't previously have. So I'm like, I was joking around yesterday that like Kristen Bell, my emotional scale is like, if I'm not like between here and here, I'm crying. And it's been really like gratifying and inspiring to see some of the examples coming out of our customer base, and makes me obviously emotive, but like excited to see what they'll do next.
Yeah, and we are all just like a little bit happier for it. I would like to thank you all, Amanda, Lee, Megan, so much for joining me. And if you're watching now, thank you so much for joining us. It's Friday, so we're going to wrap it up. But like I said, I don't know how to end conversations, so I'm just going to tell you all to take care and have a great weekend.
You too.
You
Thanks,
too.
George. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.